Namaskar. Welcome to online course on Indian Constitution. Today we are going to talk about Constituent Assembly debates and the choices which framers of Indian Constitution made about our Constitution. You may recall in the last lecture we talked about what is a constitution, why constitutions are made, what constitution should contain, how constitutions are classified, etc. Now come to this very important subject, but first of all, you should know how constitutions are drafted world over. So one method is that the constitution will be drafted when there is a break from the past. First, there will be direct election of members of the Constituent Assembly. Once the constitution is drafted, it will be put to vote. This method has not been adopted in India. How was constitution drafted? How we adopted it? We will discuss today. So let us first of all talk about the evolution of constitution in modern India. As you know that the East India Company was incorporated in London in 1600. Then they came to India as a trading company, and due to the rivalries amongst Indian princes, they were able to get a control of our country. In 1857, we had the first war of independence against the British, against the East India Company, and all Indians united under the banner of last Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. Nevertheless, after the war, the British government took the direct control of India and initiated what can be termed the first phase of constitutional reforms. In 1861, Indian Council Act was passed, but no Indian was made its member. 1885 is a milestone in our constitutional history because Indian National Congress was founded. And in 1892, Indians were included in the council but not in the Executive Council of Governor General. That brings me to 1909 when we had a first major reform of 20th century, what are called Government of India Act 1909 or Minto-Morley reform. Now in the Legislative Council, greater representation was given. The membership increased from 16 to 60. Indirect election of provincial council was started. Now 3 members were from traders, universities, tea plantation, municipalities and Muslims. Then as we move forward, another major milestone in our constitutional history was Government of India Act 1919, what is called Montego-Chelmsford Reform. Now it can be said to be the first significant constitutional document. It gave autonomy to the provinces but made a classification between provincial and central subjects. The Governor General in Council, as far as Act is concerned, did not clearly mention that Indians will be included. All decisions were to be made by the majority, but Governor General was given the power to overrule or the power of veto. As we move forward, we have to understand that this 1919 Act also talked of 2 houses, bicameral legislation. So there was to be a legislative assembly and there will be a council of state. The council of state out of 60 had official members, but the act said official members will not exceed more than 20. So 40 members will be elected in some manner. And then the legislative assembly had 140 members. 100 were to be elected, 40 to be nominated with 26 official members. In terms of powers, substantial powers including power to modify or repeal laws enacted by the British Parliament was given. And now this was a significant development because the mother parliament, the parent parliament, British Parliament should have had the overriding power, but it was a major reform because an Indian house had the power to modify or repeal laws made by the Parliament in London. But the executive control, overriding control of the executive continued even under the Government of India Act 1919. Now the act also introduced diarchy or dual government in provinces. So there was a classification between reserved subjects and transferred subjects. The reserved subjects which were reserved with the governor were revenue, administration of justice, and police. The transferred subject had public health, education, local self-government, and the provincial legislature also, the composition differed from state to state. So in Bengal, it was to consist of 139 members and 50 members. Assam had 50 members. Then you had a famous Jallianwala Bagh massacre, because of which these developments, had a major obstruction. Another big milestone in our constitutional evolution is Motilal Nehru Committee. The Britishers has taunted us and said we will not be able to draft our constitution. A committee headed by Motilal Nehru quickly drafted a constitution. This constitution was significant in terms of providing adult suffrage. Everyone will have a right to vote, providing for federalism, and providing for rights. Then in 1927, you got the Simon Commission. The report was submitted in 1930. Now the Congress from 1934 onwards specifically included in its official demands constitution of a constituent assembly, so that a constitution for India is drafted by Indians. No one should dictate us what kind of constitution we want to have. And 1935 Government of India Act is the major significant constitutional development, because even today 2/3 of our constitution is based on Government of India Act. Of course, it did not have fundamental rights. Now you had federalism in the Government of India Act 1935. You had governors, provinces, and Indian states, or what we'll call princely states. The states were given an option to join federation through instrument of accession. In the context of Article 370, you must have heard of this term, instrument of accession. Now, this instrument of accession was also there under the Government of India Act 1935. So, every princely state had to sign instrument of accession to join this federation. But the precondition for the constitution of federation was consent of half of princely states. Now, moving forward and looking more intensely at the Government of India Act, which, as I said, is a major milestone of our constitutional evolution. Unlike Government of India Act 1919, which had provided the diarchy at provinces, the 1935 Act provided diarchy at center and made Governor General too powerful. Here the legislature was just by courtesy. Again, there was a division because it was a federal constitution, central and provincial subjects. Now, Government of India Act was never enforced at the central level, but for provinces it came into being in 1937. There were residue powers which Governor General could give either to the center or to provinces. This was something very, very important and something very unique. As you know, in a federal constitution, generally the powers of the center are listed and residue is given to the states, or in the other model, the power of the states are listed and the residue is given to the center. Here it was provided that the Governor General could give residue power either to the center or to the provinces. It created powerful center, and that's why Government of India Act 1935 in a way envisaged a quasi-federal polity. One of the greatest weakness of Government of India Act 1935 was diarchy at center, and it did not create in a sincere way responsible government. Of course, it provided for Council of State, which was a permanent house like future Rajya Sabha. The composition was that from Indian provinces 156 members will come, from princely states 104 members will come. Then it provided for Legislative Assembly, which was like Lok Sabha. It had 125 members from the princely states and 250 members from the provinces elected by the provincial assemblies. In terms of powers, The legislative assembly was more powerful, like Lok Sabha, and it had all the powers, and in terms of financial matters, it had greater powers. As we move forward to post 1935 India in terms of constitutional developments, the Congress ministers resign in 1939. The federation at center was postponed indefinitely. In 1942, you would get the Cripps Commission, which has said that after the World War II, there will be an independent dominion in Commonwealth, and there will be an elected body to frame the constitution. So our long-standing demand of a constituent assembly was conceded. The members of the constitution body were to be elected by an electoral college formed by the provincial legislatures. This is what eventually happened, and our constituent assembly members came from the provincial legislatures. The princely states were also to send their representatives to the Constituent Assembly. This also happened when the Constituent Assembly was eventually constituted. After the World War II, in 1946, you got the cabinet plan, and see, the British people voted out Prime Minister Winston Churchill. You were good as a Prime Minister during war, but post-war, Labour Party came to power. And Labour Party was interested in giving independence to India. On May 15, 1946, the proposals of the cabinet plan were made public. It also proposed a federation. The center was to have defense, foreign affairs, and communications. The residue subjects were given to the provinces. The Constituent Assembly was to be formed immediately. And it was provided that there will be one seat for 1 million people, and subsequently these seats were distributed between major communities. The elections happened in 1946. A national government was formed on September 2, 1946 under Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru with 14 ministers, 6 Congress ministers, 5 Muslim League ministers, and 3 of minorities. Muslim League, after initial reluctance, joined in October 1946, and the first meeting of our Constituent Assembly was held on December 9, 1946 under the chairmanship of Sachidanand Sinha, who was nominated as the interim president of newly constituted Constituent Assembly. How our Constituent Assembly worked? What are the various choices it made? What are the various phases of its working? Let us try to understand. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as president. Shri B.N. Rao was appointed as the advisor to the Constituent Assembly. Initially, the plan was to have Sir Ever Jennings, who was also helping Ceylon in the drafting of their constitution and subsequently helped Pakistan in the drafting of their constitution. But Gandhiji suggested that we should have an Indian as the advisor to our Constituent Assembly, and B.N. Rao really played a major role in the drafting of our constitution. The Constituent Assembly was to consist of 389 members, 292 members from governors' provinces, 4 members from chief commissioners' provinces. As many as 93 members were nominated by the princely states. You can see that India at that time had about 600 princely states. The credit of integration of these princely states with India largely goes to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Then, if you look at the election results, Congress won 199 of 210 general seats. Muslim League won 73 out of the 78 Muslim seats. Out of 296 members, 207 members took part in the proceedings on December 9, 1946, the first day of the meeting of the Constituent Assembly. Now, Constituent Assembly used to work through committees. So, several committees were constituted. One of the most important committee was the Drafting Committee, which was headed by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. The Union Powers Committee and Union Constitution Committee were headed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Provincial Constitution Committee was headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel also headed the Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights and Minority Rights. So there were various committees, and first in the committee discussion used to take place, and then it used to come to the main body, and then it used to go to the drafting committee, and then used to come back to the main body. So it was a unique experiment, and the debates of these Constituent Assembly are available in 12 volumes, and the kind of discussions they have are revealing, and they demonstrate the strength of Indian democracy, the wisdom of framers of our Constitution, because it is very difficult for any new democracy to draft this kind of enlightened, visionary, far-sighted constitution. Now, if you look at the working of the Constituent Assembly, on December 13, 1946, objective resolution was moved by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and it was passed on January 22nd, 1947. In the next lecture, I will tell you that the predominant view is that the preamble of the Constitution is largely based on this objective resolution. On July 22, 1947, our national flag was adopted, and then on 15th August 1947, we will get that biggest day of our history, the red letter day of our history, when India was declared as an independent nation. Finally, the Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949. It took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days for the Constituent Assembly to draft world's lengthiest constitution. Now, if you look at the working of the Constituent Assembly, you can see that the 3 phases were there. From December 11, 1946 to August 14, 1947, we are not yet independent. So the Constituent Assembly was just doing the job of drafting the Constitution. That is to say, it was working merely as a Constituent Assembly. On August 15, 1947, we got independence. So Constituent Assembly now was working not only as the Constituent Assembly, but also as the Provisional Parliament of independent India. So it was doing a dual job. It was drafting the Constitution and simultaneously performing the functions of interim parliament. Now the Constitution drafting came to an end on 26 November 1949, when the Constitution of India was adopted. So from 27th November 1949 till 1952, when we had our first Lok Sabha elections, Constituent Assembly was working as Provisional Parliament of independent India, and it also passed amendments. So this same Constituent Assembly, acting as Parliament till 1952, made certain amendments. The first amendment was a major amendment by which the 9th schedule was added to the Constitution. Now, if you look at the choices which our framers made in terms of the Constitution which we have today, Shri B.N. Rao, Constituent Assembly advisor, had collected all the constitutions, and all the best provisions of those constitutions had been incorporated in the Indian Constitution. This thesis is not entirely true, as we did make innovation. After First World War, 17 democracies were set up, but subsequently only few survived as democratic states. Several democratic countries turned authoritarian. Italy, Portugal, Poland, Japan, Germany, they all reverted to authoritarianism. We adopted parliamentary democracy rather than the American system of presidential form of government because we wanted continuity. For last 200 years, being a British colony, we were used to parliamentary procedures, and we did not want to create this kind of a system where personal charisma of one person will decide who rules the country. We made another major choice, in my opinion, in terms of giving universal adult suffrage in spite of illiteracy in our country. In my opinion, it was a bold and courageous choice that every Indian will have a right to vote. Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar rightly said, franchise is right, not a privilege. Unlike Government of India Act, we did not say that only those who have land will have right to vote. Only those who are educated will have right to vote. Only those who pay income tax will have right to vote. We made it a right of each and every Indian rather than the privilege of elite. And this was a major choice. Similarly, we said we will have a single citizenship as opposed to unitary system. We adopted federalism. No country adopts federalism out of its own choice, free choice, because unitary government is better. We knew that we are a big country. We have several regional aspirations, and therefore we opted for federalism rather than a unitary state, even though Great Britain is a unitary state. Similarly, we adopted fundamental rights from United States of America. But unlike United States of America, which does not include in the Constitution the restrictions which can be imposed on the fundamental rights, we prefer to write those restrictions in the text of the Constitution. That's why we are saying it was not a blind borrowing. We borrowed from United States of America several things, but we did not borrow due process of law. When we were drafting our Article 21, we said we will have procedure established by law rather than due process of law. It is a different story that subsequently in Maneka Gandhi and several other cases, Supreme Court virtually brought in due process of law. We also borrowed from Ireland directive principles of state policy, which are the positive obligations of the state. The Constitution was written both in English as well as Hindi. Each member signed both the copies. As far as the English copy is concerned, the Constitution of India on its adoption had 1,17,369 words. Now, it is the lengthiest constitution of the world. It had 22 parts with 395 articles and 8 schedules. And remember, our original constitution was not typed. It was handwritten by Shri Prem Narayan Raizada. And each page of the constitution was decorated by artists from Shanti Niketan such as Ram Manohar Sinha and Nandlal Bose. These decorations, they depict our cultural history. So there is a mention of Mahabharata, there is a mention of Lord Ram, there is a mention of Emperor Akbar. Now, what did we learn today? We learned the evolution of our constitution post 1857, how the Constituent Assembly was constituted, how it worked, what choices it made, and why it made those choices. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about a very important subject, the preamble of Indian Constitution. What is there in the preamble? Is it part of the Constitution? How it can be amended? What use of it can be made in interpreting the Constitution? We will learn in the next lecture. Thank you very much. Dhanyavad.